Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back with another video, and today we're going to be doing another map guide, and this time we'll be looking at one of the most dreaded 2CP maps, Horizon Lunar Colony. In the interest of keeping this video short, I'll be looking at just the key areas of the map that often define which team comes out on top. As always, if you see something you like or you learn something new, then please do like, comment and subscribe because it really does help. Now, let's get to it guys. So when it comes to Horizon, Point A is pretty much defined by two key areas, that being this high ground here, and then obviously the point. Now we'll get to talking about the point in a minute, but let's start with this high ground because this really is the focal point of both defenses and attacks on this map. So as you can see, this is really a great vantage point for any defenders set up on this high ground here. You have great sight lines on the two entrances that the attackers can come from, that being this here and this here. And more than that, you can kind of follow them wherever they go. If they end up going this way, you can follow them with your fire. And if they go into this tunnel, well, you can still watch them. And if they happen to try to come up the stairs to contest you, well, no problem again, you just rotate a little bit, you shift your position, and here you are blocking them in the stairs. Now with Horizon, it is really important that you hold this high ground unless you have a specific defense designed to hold a point. The advantage of holding high ground is that you can always later drop to point when you need to. You can always rotate around, drop to point. You could drop to point from this angle here, but by holding this high ground initially, you make it super difficult for defense to actually get through. So what's the principle? What are you trying to achieve here by holding this spot? Because that's something that's important for people to understand. So of course there's no point holding this high ground if you don't actually have characters who can do damage at that kind of range. So there's no point picking Reinhardt, Zarya and Reaper, holding your shield here and expecting that to do any damage. This is generally where you'll see the Orisa play, you'll see a lot of Sigma play now as well, and you'll tend to see medium to long range characters like Widowmaker, Hanzo, Torbjorns even, and quite often Junkrats too, because the ability to just hit down these sidelines can be very abusive. The other advantage of running someone like an Orisa is that a halt could be really deadly, because most of the times attackers will kind of hold up in this room, or they might even hold up in here, and being able to drop a halt here, or being able to drop a halt somewhere around here, and then pulling the attackers out of their hiding spots to be picked off by your DPS and the rest of your team can be very powerful. So what you're really trying to do by holding this point is you're trying to get the attackers to burn as many resources as possible. This could be their shields, this could be their cooldowns, this could be their HP. And of course, ideally, if you get a pick or two, well, that's amazing. Now, quite often, you will see teams rush to point either by going underneath you here on the railings, or perhaps they've just got some special tactics. Maybe they've got a Lucio and their speed boosting through, maybe they've got a Symmetra and they're TPing through, and they want to rush to point. Well, again, no problem. You rotate, and you have two kind of options. You can either, one option is to set up in a high ground hold here, and the advantage is you have this big window. Should you drop, for example, an Orisa shield, that you can now look down on the point through and get lots of damage in. And essentially it's the same principle. You've got a really hard to get to high ground and you're doing lots of damage, you're making them burn their HP pools. Of course, if you do this, you have to make sure somebody touches. But this is what I wanted to talk about with regards to Horizon Point A, is that it is a very interesting design in terms of how the window of this map works. So as you can see from even really far away, there's a clear sight line towards point that both attackers and defenders can use. Attackers, namely in the sense that you will see quite often Widowmakers get set up somewhere around here, so that even when their team is contesting point, they have this great angle to be hitting everybody both on the high ground and on the point. But for a defender, you can also use it. It's not quite a all is lost moment, because like I said, you can set up this window here, and now you've got a great chance to do damage to the enemy team. Now of course, you may also want to rotate around slowly and get to point from this side, but to understand which you do and why, let's just talk about the nature of this point for a second. So the key nature of this point is that although there are 4 distinct entrances, they're all A, very close to each other, and B, they almost all have the same problems and benefits. So as a defender, what you'll note is that every single one of these entrances, that being one here, one we can count here, half, and then one here, they're all very narrow doorways. And this is why quite often on Horizon, you will see teams run a Mei. Now the advantage of running a Mei is that should the enemy team decide that they want to run on the point, they come all the way around here, and in they walk. Well, now you have the chance to drop a wall, and you can isolate 1 to 2 members of their team, pick them off easily, and that's a fight win for you. Same principle here, and same principle on the other side too. So due to this dynamic of the map, it is very important that you make use of these entrances. If you let the enemy team, if you let the attackers walk into this middle area here, well, now you're going to be in a bit of trouble, because as you can see, this is a lot more wide open. And now, where's a good position for you to hold? Let's say you have an Orisa still because you were set up on the high ground, If you hold here, very easy for them to walk past you. If you hold here, again, very easy to walk past you. And of course, there's always the danger that should you hold on either of these sides, the enemy team can flank around. So if you're holding on this left side here, well, they can come from back there, get behind your shield. If you're holding this right side here, well, they can get around here, get behind your shield. So it is very, very important that whether you're playing Reinhardt, Sigma, Orisa, or even Winston, you need to make sure you apply as much pressure as you can to these doorways to make sure that you make full advantage of everything they can offer. So bearing this in mind, think about your team comp accordingly. If you're going to run a long range kind of comp, well, then you want to make as much use of this high ground as possible, and you just want to try and do as much damage as you can here, get as many picks as you can, drain as much time on the bank as you can by continually making the enemy reset, continually staggering them, and continually forcing them to hide in those two rooms. If they get to the point, well, then your long range comp is probably best suited somewhere around here, so that you can keep doing damage on the point. But of course, this requires that you at least have one person touching. So I suggest you have a designated point toucher, someone like a Mei, someone like an off tank. On the flip side, if you do want to run a short range kind of comp, you want to incorporate a Mei and a Reaper as well. Anyone who does well in these short, narrow areas. Again, Doomfist is another hero who might thrive here. Well, now your main objective is just to keep the fight going on the point and to try to brawl out in these narrow doorways and make use of the potential to wall and zone people off and force them into areas where your team will do maximum damage. Now, point B of Horizon is a lot more varied. It can be quite fluid, so let's quickly just touch through each of the key areas and what their benefits and what their negatives are. So like on point A, there is the potential to hold on a high ground here on point B. This balcony here again offers you the same kind of principle as you had on point A, which is that you have a great window potentially to be raining down damage on the attackers as they come through. But of course, it is a lot more easily accessible to attackers, and it's not quite as oppressive either. Where you hold on this high ground though, again, depends on the kind of comp you're running. If you're running a shorter range comp, you want to roll right up here against this doorway. You want to be applying as much pressure as you can, because of course, your characters can't really reach much farther than this. So you need to make sure you don't let attackers come through past this point for free. Now, if you're running a more long range comp, something Orisa based, something with a Sigma, maybe you're running double shields, in that case, you probably want to take a couple steps back, because unlike the short range comp, you guys can reach this far, right? It doesn't really matter. You don't really have much drop off whether you're holding here or whether you're holding here. But if you hold here, the disadvantage is that potentially it's very easy for attackers to gather up around here, and you've kind of defeated the strengths of your own comp. So by holding these few steps back here, and potentially even a little bit further back over here next to this corner, you have the chance to do a lot of damage before the attackers actually come to you, and you force them to make an awkward choice. Do they try and contest you on the high ground and end up taking potentially lots of damage, potentially fatal damage, or do they try and just run on the point and give you the chance to hold this high ground for free and just do lots of damage from up here? Of course, like on point A, if you do hold up here and the attackers start to contest, well, again, now you've got a bit of an issue, because moving a comp from up here to down here can prove a little bit tricky, and having just one person contesting is a little bit tougher on point B, because unlike A, where there was just one narrow area, everybody was funneled into it, B has quite a lot of options for pressure points, as we might call them. So it's not as easy on point B to just hold the high ground blindly and continue to do damage. At some point, you will probably have to drop down. In which case, again, it's very, very important, if you're running a long range comp, this is, that you hold one of the back corners. So again, be very mindful where the enemy is going. If they're coming up here, great, you can continue to hold the high ground. But if they're rotating down main, if they're rotating down the right, then it's very important that you adjust accordingly, and maybe you shift to your defense here, so that you are touching the point while still keeping enough distance to potentially get your damage in, or you hold on this back corner here, which again actually has pretty good sightlines at a point and can kind of see everything coming from quite a distance. You'll also see, for the same reason, quite a lot of teams hold up here, and this can be very powerful, but this is one of the more difficult places to coordinate. It is something that you might see in Overwatch League at some points, because of course pro teams are very, very good at using high ground like this, but in solo queue this might be a little bit tougher to execute for the same sort of reason as holding the high ground here forever is sometimes difficult to execute, because let's say as an attacker you see that they're all holed up here, well, okay, well, you just run around into this room all the way around, and as you can see now, there is no angle on the team once they go through this room here. At that point, if they come on point and they start contesting, again, you're gonna have to send somebody to drop, or you're gonna have to all drop at once. If you all drop at once and you're a long range comp, you're probably gonna lose that fight, and if you send just one person, well, again, there's quite the chance that they get focused down and now you're in a bit of trouble. So this is a really nice spot if you can have a really coordinated team, but in general, just think about your composition. And what I would say with point B of Horizon is you have to be very, very fluid. You have to move as the attackers move. So you can really run anything here. I've kind of spelled out how the long range comp would work. With Orion Zarya, again, you probably want to start off holding here, but you basically want to meet them at whichever entrance they choose to come from. So if they choose to come main, well, you guys drop from up there, you come down here, and now you're in their face again. You're making it hard for them to come through, and if you're pressured, you back up to these pillars here. Again, natural cover. Remember, guys, always be looking for natural cover. If they're going towards the right-hand side, again, you meet them here, and you make it very hard for them to come through. If they opt to go to the right room, okay, well, we rotate, and again, we meet them here. So you have to be very fluid. You have to adapt and adjust. You have to find the best angle for your team comp, depending on where the attacker is going. With the dive comp, it's the same sort of principle. Essentially, you want to hold with the Winston, and you want to make the entrances as difficult to come through as possible and get as much cleave damage in as possible. Just make sure you meet them at every door. And as with any point being an assault map, you have a huge spawn advantage. So if you get in a position where you started to lose a couple members, the most important thing is to make sure that you rotate who touches point one at a time, because you can really keep this extended forever when you come into these two entrances. You should be able to at least draw the fight out for a long time, which always favors the defenders. Now, moving on to the attacking side, how do you approach breaking down Horizon? Well, Horizon, like many 2CP maps, is one of those things where if you break it, you tend to break it very easily and you often snowball 2 points. And if you don't, you can end up struggling forever and it just feels almost impossible to do. Again, like I said, the key areas remain the same. That's the high ground and the point. So as an attacker, you really have kind of two decisions to make. Do you contest the high ground? Do you contest the point? And this obviously depends on two things: your comp and their comp. If, like I said, they're actually running a comp that isn't very strong up here, so it doesn't actually have a lot of damage, doesn't actually have a lot of range, then you actually have no need to contest the high ground. You can actually just go straight on the point and not worry too much about the damage you're going to be taking from up here. If, of course, they do have a very strong long range comp, they are applying a lot of pressure, are doing a lot of damage, then you basically need to answer this one question for yourself: can I get to this point without dying? And this is something that teams either fail to ask or answer incorrectly, because contesting this high ground can be super difficult, right? Let's spell out the scenario. Let's say you're running a dive comp. Well, most of the times if you jump up here as a Winston, you'll probably be shredded in a couple seconds, and that's the fight over right there. If you're running a Reinhardt Zarya comp and you try to run up the stairs, well, again, you're in a lot of trouble. And same idea if you're in a Risa comp and you're trying to slow push. If you're with a Sigma, you're trying to slow push. It can be very difficult to go up these stairways. And going into space is not really great either, because not only does it take you very long, but at the end of it, you're coming out in front of them in another choke point. So going into space is generally a bad idea as a team. Of course, it's a good place sometimes to send a DPS for a surprise factor, but in general, you need to approach your attack as a collective. So let's talk about what your options are. So your best options are basically speed, TPs, or subtlety. Speed being you pick a Lucio, you get a shield, maybe that's a Reinhardt, maybe that's a Sigma, and you just run your team all the way around and get to the point. The reason you pretty much need Lucio is that if you don't have a Lucio, this trip takes way too long, and in that amount of time, I guarantee your Ryan shield breaks, somebody gets picked off, and that fight is pretty much over before it's even begun. With the speed boost though, it is definitely manageable. You can make it to this point in time, and once you get here, now you're forcing the attackers to drop. Now you're forcing them to be the ones to make a decision. With the symmetric TP, well, that's even stronger and even more direct. All you really have to do, put a shield up somewhere around here, drop the teleporter, comes out that side, boom, you're all on point. And of course, with double shield being the go-to play right now, Symmetra is very strong and can be a really powerful presence on the point. The other thing you can do, of course, with the Lucio comp is that if you go around here and you feel that the enemy team needs to be addressed on this high ground, you can always then come up from these stairs here, and that's a much easier high ground to access than those other stairs, because if the defenders are already set up on that side, it's very easy for them to hold that choke point and make your life difficult. Whereas if you're coming around here, it should be a relatively free passage, and then once you get up here, well, now you can get up in their face. Now you can rush towards them and start brawling it out if you feel like they really need to be addressed. Now, I did mention that another idea was to potentially use subtlety, and this basically involves things like distraction. So theoretically, what you might want to do is send a Winston or someone like that up here, a Wrecking Ball, a D.Va, with the purpose of only buying a few seconds. You jump up here, you commit some of your cooldowns, your shield, your defense matrix, whatever it is, but as soon as you're pressured, you jump down. Now, what's the purpose of that? Well, essentially, what you do by doing this is you buy maybe 3-4 seconds for your team, and that should be enough time for them to go, let's say, from here to here, or if they've already made their way here, then from here to here. And once you get there, the key part of getting to this point is that if you can get your team to here, well, now they're covered. Now they're not under threat from this high ground, and what they can potentially do is run under here, skate around these edges, And now they have again a choice, a great choice. They can walk up the stairs and contest the team on the high ground, or they can choose to run on a point, and now you can brawl it out. And again, the decision you make is dependent on how much pressure you feel is going to come from the high ground. If you feel that when you run on a point, they'll just take this high ground and spam you down, well then maybe you need to go up there and you need to deal with them. But if you feel like actually once we get to point, we can zone them out with Mei walls, we can focus down whoever does contest point, well then you just sit here, you wait for them to come through, and now you become the defenders. Now you can exploit these narrow chokeways, now you can make it very hard for them to come through, and it should be fairly straightforward from that point to cap A. Moving on to B, as an attacker you actually have quite a few options. And one of the things I see frequently people doing wrong in games is that they tend to just use one door over and over and over again, and forget that there's pretty much 4 distinct pathways that you can use to attack Horizon. The most common one is probably going up to this high ground here. Teams love to take this area from them, and of course for good reason. Like I said, this high ground can be potentially tricky. So if you can come up here, if you can take this safely, and this is really great because once you bully the defenders off this place, then you should be able to drop on the point for free. However, quite often I see people spend too much time trying to wrestle this high ground off the defenders instead of just trying to be a little bit smarter and approach from a different angle. Now the other option you have right nearby is to go use this entrance here. The advantage of this entrance is it's completely covered, and if the enemy are on the top here, well look at this, how can they do any damage to you? They just cannot. And now you have options. Now you can run on the point, and you might feel like running on the point will pressure them to force them to drop down. Or you can be a little bit tricky. You can go all the way around, run up these stairs if you want to. And now, again, you have the same option as A. You can bully them off the high ground, you can fight them right in their face, and destroy any range advantage that they might have had. The next option, of course, is to run straight down main, the most direct route to point. And this is probably the route you want to take if you've just capped A and you want to try and make use of your momentum. Of course, with the assault changes, it's not quite as easy to snowball anymore, but still there's definitely something to be said for catching teams off guard. And this is where you'll most often see snowballs happen, is if you rush straight on the point and the enemy hasn't properly got set up yet, they haven't properly gotten set up on the high ground, they haven't properly gotten shielded up here anywhere. If you can force them to panic and you can start brawling it out before they're even ready, well that's a really good chance now to get the double cap. And now of course you have the third and fourth entrances, which are kind of start from the same area, so you may want to come from here. The advantage of this being, again, it's a lot more covered than running down main. You've got this little place to hide out behind, and you've got this pillar right here, and you can kind of slowly approach point a little bit more subtly, and you'll probably have more resources, more shielding, more HP, more cooldowns if you use that left side entrance and then start to touch point, and then you can start brawling it out. And of course you have this third option, or fourth option should I say, which is to go all the way around left, and you come through here, and this is sort of the deepest route. This gets you deepest into the defender's backline, but of course it's also potentially the most narrow and exposed entrance because you're forcing yourself into a very tight choke point, and if the defenders respond appropriately, they can kind of end up pinning you in here. So again, be smart with your approach. This may be the side you want to take if, like I said, the defenders are set up above you on here, or if you feel like maybe they're set up on the back left of the point here, because quite often you might see Orisa type setups over here. So by going all the way around, you can get right up behind them, or at the very least force them to rotate. And then again, you have options now. You can have access to their backline. You can make all sorts of use of the territory you've won. So the biggest advice for Horizon B, it's not particularly complex. It's more that people just don't use the avenues they have available. Make sure you're using all 4 sides as possible. And then basically your job is to identify what the defenders are trying to do. Are they trying to be long range? Are they trying to set up on the high ground and exploit this damage? Well, again, in that case, you have to ask yourself a question. Can we break this from up here? If the answer is yes, then sure, go from there. If the answer is no, well then you have to ask another question. If we run on a point, will we die before we get any ticks? If the answer is yes, then you need to think, okay, well, we do need to break this high ground, in which case, let's go from under, let's rotate around, let's get up these stairs, and then we'll come up from behind and we'll dislodge them that way. If the answer is no, if you feel like actually we can get on a point and we can survive long enough that they'll panic, that they'll have to drop down, well then now you have different options. Now you probably want to run down main / this side route here. Like I said, main, the quickest route, this a little bit better route, a bit more covered. And if the enemy team is already set up on the low ground here, maybe they're running a Ryan Zari, maybe they're running a Sigma on the low ground, then you may as well go down main, you may as well go down the right and engage them directly, as we often saw in the GOATS meta. And if they're set up on this high ground, well again, now here you go, this is the route you want to take. You want to dislodge them from here, or if they're taking this area here, again, same principle. You just want to use the cover available, try and get yourself access on point. And once you get to point, like any 2CP map, is just about focusing down the rapid respawns and making sure your team has enough sustain to get all 3 ticks. So that's all I got for today, guys. Hope you found this video helpful, and hope you find the map guides helpful, because I know a lot of people can be sometimes lost when they approach a map as to how exactly they should go about attacking and how exactly they should go about defending. Always remember that whatever map you are put on, make sure you're thinking about what's happening in the game, and I think that's where most people stall out, is because they stop actively thinking about, okay, what kind of comp are we running, what kind of comp are they running, where do we want to set up, where are they set up, what are the strengths of their setup, what are the strengths of our setup. And if you can start asking yourself these questions and answering them in game, then it'll be a lot easier for you to come up with answers on the fly. And that's why I've tried not to just say pick Orisa and hold here, because it's much better to understand when it comes to maps why certain areas are strong and why certain comps can be strong, and how their weaknesses can also be exploited. As always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons who do the awesome job of supporting me, and if you're interested in doing the same, please do consider signing up. The link is in the description. But other than that, that's it from me. I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.